In this video, I'm going to show you how I made these football boot cakes. I'll show you how I made the structure to support the cakes so that you can put them into interesting positions. I'll also show you how to make the template to get the right shapes and how to make the cakes look as realistic as possible. Alright, so let's kick off. So these were the inspiration boots. I'll be referring back to these pictures, and I printed them in the exact size that I wanted the boots to be so that I can hold that up against the cake later on. I didn't want my boots to be flat against a drum. I wanted to be able to move them around and put them into positions so they looked more realistic. I quite liked the position where one was on its side and the other one was sat on top. I thought that would look a little bit more interesting. So I decided to make a sort of structure for the cakes to sit on themselves. And it basically is going to be like a sole of a boot. And I wanted to make the studs as well because I thought that would give it a bit more realistic look. So what I've got is a real football boot here, and I'm going to use this to make my template. So I've got white A4 foam board, really easy to get your hands on, and it's really easy to work with. It's probably easier than using cake board, but you could also do that. So I used the shoe and drew around it to make my template, and then I double checked the measurements with my ruler against the shoe itself, because if you're drawing around something, you're usually drawing it slightly bigger than what it actually is. So checked all my measurements and drew around it, and then I cut round that with my knife. It's easier to work with this foam board stuff if you cut it with a craft knife or a really sharp knife. Scissors can tend to compress the foam, and then it just makes it a little bit harder to work with. So what I did was I cut out all the squares that I needed, and then I worked out how many I would need to build on top of each other to make it the right height to match the football boot that I was using as my sort of reference. So the answer was 3 in that case, and I just glued all 3 little squares on top of each other with a hot glue gun, and just set them aside until I had as many as I needed, and each block of 3 squares glued together would be 1 stud. When the glue was dried, I took a piece of sandpaper and just sanded each side to make everything all smooth and level. I then went back to my soles of the boot that I had cut out of the foam board earlier, and I'm going to glue the studs to the underside of the board. So you just need to pay attention when you're doing this to what direction the toe is pointing so you don't end up with 2 odd shoes. I used the real football boot to press against the foam board to make indentations where the studs would be, and I'm not worried about this being dirty because this will be the underside of the structure, so it's not going to come into contact with any cake at all. So I just drew a little circle around all the indentations so that I could see it easily, and I stuck down the studs that I had just made. And then there is a second piece of foam board that I cut that's going to go on top of that, and that is what's going to come into contact with the cake. So what I'm doing here is I've got some aluminium foil tape, and I'm going to stick that onto the part of the foam board that the cake will come in contact to. So this kind of makes the foam board like a cake card, as you can see, and it's perfectly safe to put our food on top of. So now that I've got that template ready, I am using it to cut the shape from my sheet cakes that I've made. So I've got 12 by 8 inch sheet cakes that I've baked, nice vanilla cake, and I'm just using my template to cut round and get the shapes that I need for the boot. And I'm using my reference picture that I've printed to the right size and cut to the shape of the boot, and I'm holding that against the cake each time. And all I'm doing at this stage is building the cake high enough so that it's at least as high as the reference picture. If it's more, that's fine, but it can't be less. Now I have got my structures all made and food safe. I'm going to turn them upside down so that you can see the studs from top down, and I'm just going to cover it in sugar paste. This is not going to be eaten, but it just allows me to make the underside of the shoe look realistic, because the position that I plan to put the cakes in when they're done, you will see the underside slightly. So I've just used some piping gel to stick the sugar paste to the underside there, and then just cut around the very bottom part of the studs because that's the part that will come in contact with any work surface, and if sugar paste is in contact with the work surface, it will just drag all the time. So once I've done that, I've flipped it over and it'll have plenty of time to dry while I'm carving the cake. So I'm just layering up the cake here. I've pre-cut the layers as we seen a minute ago. So I've got the bottom layer, adding some buttercream and some jam, piping a little barrier around the outside of each layer to hold the jam in place, and then the next layer can go on. This is white chocolate ganache that I'm using to secure the cake to the cake card that I've made. And I'm just going through the exact same process as I have for both boots. So this is what I've ended up with. As I said earlier, we just want to make sure we've got more cake than we need coming over and above the reference photo that I'm using. So I'm holding that against the cake and I'm using it to cut the angles that I need. I'm doing that sloping down the front and then down the back, and then I'll turn it around to the side and I will curve all of the sharp edges. So that's pretty much the gist of it. There's not lots of shapes that we need to carve for this, it's fairly simple. But do have a look around your reference photo on the digital side of it, like on your phone or your device, not just your print, because you'll see the detail a lot easier there, and make sure you can cut in anything that you think is important to be there to make it look a little bit more realistic. I think I cut a little shape in at the ankle where it would be on the ankle if it was a real boot, and eventually I did cut a little shape into the very top where your foot would go in, just to give the illusion of an indentation. So once I was happy with all the shapes that I had cut in, I covered the whole cake with white chocolate ganache, and that seals in all the freshness, and it also gives it the structure that we need, so that I'm not worried about the cake getting crushed under the weight of the sugar paste. And as I said earlier, everything we do on one, we do on the other. A good tip that I've got for recreating two cakes that are almost identical is to do each step in turn. Don't create one full cake and then go back and start again. It's easier to repeat a process than it is to do a full process and then try and do the same thing again. So once I've covered both cakes with white chocolate ganache, I'm taking some black sugar paste. This is Couture, it's one of my favourite brands, and I'm rolling it out, and this is going to be for the front part that would go over the front of your foot and the part that goes over your ankle. So I've rolled that out nice and thin, and now I'm using this mesh that I had on hand to give it some texture. So this gives it that sort of knitted texture that the boot's got, that you can see in the image. I had placed my boots in the fridge just to let them set a little bit hard before I started working on them. I quite like to do that sometimes with the ganache, but it's not essential, and some people don't like to put their cakes in the fridge, so that's just personal preference. With chocolate ganache, you don't need to put your cakes in the fridge. The chocolate will set, but it might just take a little bit longer and it might not be quite as hard. So I've placed that black sugar paste on top of the boot exactly where I want it, and my print is going to tell me exactly where it needs to go. And then I'm using that print and I'm holding it directly over the top of the cake and the sugar paste, and I'm using the back of my knife to indent into the sugar paste that's going to show me where I need to cut away and make it really nice and neat, and that'll make it look more realistic. And again, once I've done one, I'll do the exact same process on the other. So now that the black part of the boots is done, I'm going to move on to the purple part. But when I was looking at the boots, I thought it would actually look a little bit more realistic if I iced it white and then airbrushed it, because if you look at the photo, you can see that the front part of the boots has a white highlight right down the front, and then the sides are purple, and it's got a bit of a transition, like a gradient. It's not solid colours, so that was why I opted to do that. You can of course just buy purple sugar paste if you're not too bothered about it looking really realistic, but I was trying to go for as real as possible. So the method that I chose on this one was to roll out the sugar paste big enough to go all the way over the top of the boot and over it, and then I just cut a slice right down the middle of it where the black sugar paste is, and that means I can put the sugar paste all over the area that's not been covered at all, and then just cut away the parts that have, and I thought that would be a little bit easier and neater than trying to cut panels and then make them match up and buff away joins, and I thought it worked quite well. So then I just cut away any excess and smoothed it all down. And of course repeated on the right shoe, but I won't show you that. I'll move straight on to the next part, which is to airbrush the purple colour on. So I'm using this sheet of mesh again, and this time what I'm going to do is airbrush through it. So I'm just holding it against the boot and then I'm going to airbrush over the top of it. And what happens is the lines from the mesh, the ink from the airbrush doesn't go onto the paste, so it's kind of creating this, it's almost like a netting, but because it's so fine it just looks like a woven texture. So it actually looks really quite similar to the boot that's in the picture. So that worked out quite well. But I was noticing that while I was airbrushing I could see little bits where it was sort of blending down onto the sole part of the shoe, which I didn't want. I wanted a nice clean line around the bottom of the shoe. So I just took a piece of cardboard and just went around the whole boot and airbrushed that purple line so that I had a part that I could stop and it wasn't going to gradually go from purple to white, it was just going to stop right at the sole of the shoe. So I've went all around the side of the boots on both sides and the back with this mesh and airbrushed the purple over it. I'm being careful not to touch the mesh against the airbrush colour that's laid down, because what you'll do is lift it back off. Once it dried a little bit, I went over again with a light spray of the colour, just very lightly, as I say, because if you put too much on you'll take away that texture that you've just added with the mesh. And I've left that front part at the toes blank, because that's where it's going to gradually go from purple to white. And now I'm coming to the part where I'll add in all the details. So I've got the orange Nike ticks and all the little black laces and the detail on the sides. So you could always do edible prints for these things, but if I've got the time, I do find that making them yourself from the sugar paste makes it look more realistic, and I just like the look a lot better than just sticking an edible print on. Sometimes it's needed, and sometimes you can't make them from hand because they just won't look as good, but yep, I do prefer to make them. So how I do that is I'll roll out a panel of sugar paste. So in this case I've got this bright orange. This is a Renshaw ready coloured orange, so it's really vibrant. And then I use my template picture just to draw the shape with my Dresden tool, and then I'll just cut that shape out. For this I decided that it would look better if I built it up with two, so for each Nike tick I've got two that I've cut out and I stick them together, and that makes them a little bit chunkier and they stand out a little bit more. I'm just gluing them together with water, there's just water on that paintbrush, and that sticks really well. I don't need edible glue. You can use it if you prefer, but I prefer water. So once I've got the Nike ticks, I'll put them aside and let them dry out a little bit, just so that it's easier to work with, because if you use them just fresh they can sometimes bend. And I'm making the little labels that go on the back of the shoe. The part that's sort of round your ankle at the back. So I've again used the template to cut the shape that I want, and I'll just cut all them out and put them aside as well. For all the black outlines on the sides and the laces, I decided to use my extruder. So you can buy these on Amazon or like Cake Decorating Company and these types of places. So that, sometimes they're called a clay extruder, but basically it's just a little device where you put your sugar paste or your modelling paste inside and you wind it down, and as you wind it down it feeds out this sort of spaghetti looking stuff, and you can get lots of different little pieces that go on the front to create different shapes. So this was the shape that I needed, just a simple thin black line. So I'm using it to outline the Nike ticks, and later I'll also use it to make the laces. So I won't lie, this can take hours. Obviously it's a lot of detailed work and it does take a long time, but I do think it pays off. So I'm moving on to the back labels here. It's like an orange, and then I'm putting the black on top. And then I can move on to putting the black, I'm not really sure what you would call this. It's the design on the side. So it's like the lace loops, but they've got black lines that are going down each side as well. It's like part of the design of the shoe. So I've basically just taken the black sugar paste that I've put through the extruder, and I'm just using my reference picture to decide exactly where they should go, lining them up, looping them round, and then just trying to replicate the design that's in my photo. That's all it is. It takes a long time, and it can be a bit fiddly, but that's all I'm doing. Also, for this last part at the back, you can see here, what I did was I rolled out a larger piece of sugar paste and I drew round the outlines of the reference picture, and then I cut that out because it's much thicker than the side parts, and that made life a little bit easier as well. And was the exact same for the very back part as well. It was quite a big piece, so I just rolled out a piece of black sugar paste and sort of drew over the top of it with my Dresden tool and cut that shape out and placed it on top. The couture sugar paste blends really well, so once it's on you can blend it with your Dresden tool, your finger, a little bit of water sometimes helps, and because it's black it also makes it a little bit easier for blending. It's the exact same process all the way around the shoe. Just make sure that you have got a reference photo that shows you the right side of the shoe and the left side, just in case there are any subtle differences that you want to capture. But yeah, this one's pretty much the same. I'm just following the same thing that I've just did, and putting all the details on the inside of the shoe as the outside. So I'm almost done now. The laces go on the front, and that again is just the extruder with the simple black line, and I've just crisscrossed it over to make it look like laces. And I'm just going to paint on some of the detail on the front. So those labels that I made earlier, I'm not sure what else you would call them, badges. So I've got them and they've firmed up a little bit so they're easier to handle. So I'm hand painting the one that goes on the front because it was just easier than trying to make letters spelling out the word air in the most tiniest you've ever seen. I'm not sure it's possible. So I hand painted that with a bright orange paint, and that just gets stuck onto the front of the cake with a little bit of water. And then I used my reference photo just to make tiny little marks where the black lines on the front of the detail of the shoe, where they go, and I'm painting them on because they're a lot finer than the black lines on the sides. So it does need a little bit of a steady hand, and just keep referring back to your reference picture to get the shapes and position of them right. This is a black edible dust, I think it's Rainbow Dust brand, but yeah, it's just black dust, isn't it? Mixed with dipping solution. You don't need to use an alcohol, you can use lemon essence or something like that, but dipping solution is my choice for painting. As you can see, I've painted a black line around the sole of the shoe just before it meets the bottom part that we made earlier, and then I'm just putting on the last little badges on the back. I'll then just cut away any excess of the black around the bottom and make sure it's really neat and tidy, and smooth any rough edges that I might need to smooth out, and that's pretty much it. As I've been saying the whole way through this video, you would repeat the whole process on shoe number 2, but I won't show you all of that again. If this video was useful for you or you enjoyed it, then please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. There's lots of different things you can do with this. I went back and put some orange sugar paste around the studs just to make it stand out. And what I really love to do is make a really interesting drum that the cakes are going to sit on as well. So I use a nail brush that I only use for cakes to make a grass texture on the green icing, and then I put some dyed desiccated coconut on as well. And I think it just looks really interesting. I think it looks really good. And then you can put the boots however you like, position them however you like.